How's everybody doing tonight? So, Elaine, I have another topic before we get on to topic to discuss. Now, there's something called, what is it called? Curtain bangs. Have you heard of curtain bangs? No, you're muted.
No, I never have. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. So let me pull this up. It is, there we go. It is the newest fashion of 2021. And to me, what I always called it as I got bangs and I'm sick of them, so I'm trying to grow them out. Bangs.
I feel like those bangs have been out longer than 2021. I think it's like the.
Well,
I see why they call them curtains. I mean,
yeah,
that would be how you part your curtains.
But they've been out since the 60s and 70s. I remember Goldie Hawn is the one who I thought of right away for it. But I've had them plenty of times because I've gotten bangs and given up on it. And I think it's so funny is it's a new trend. It's new fashion is what they were saying in this, in some of these articles I was reading. And I'm thinking, it's not new fashion, girls. What it's called is it's your grandma's or great grandma's in some cases hair.
Yeah. Not my cup of tea, but yeah, it's definitely not new. But they're calling everything else new. I mean, they have these like sparkly headbands now that were like out in the 90s that all of my kids are like, oh, can we get these? Can we get these? And I'm like, those have been out forever.
I'm totally in awe because I have them right now, and that's because I got bangs and I didn't like them after like 2 weeks, and I'm trying to grow them out again. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's my little bitching for a moment because that kind of stuff just gets me. Tonight,
no,
you guys.
Tonight,
our listeners, our viewers are, oh Lord, they're in the chat. We're going to be talking to some people that have been.
Am I frozen on camera?
No.
That's so weird because it's like frozen on here. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Have been in the prison system, and they've been, they're out obviously now, but we're going to talk to them about their experiences before, during, and after, and how they are going past the mistakes that they have been made, accused of. I'm not saying that they did it or they didn't, but they are on tonight to talk about how to move past it and how to learn to live with what society has now put them into, which isn't fair. Let me pull them up right now because they're busy talking in the green room. And I know you've seen these two gentlemen before on it, and it's Monty and Sammy. And then we have another guest with us, Linda. Linda has also had issues with the system and had to go through it. So hi, guys.
What's up, guys?
Monty, you're muted.
Hello.
I'm figuring it out. I was caught up with the abuse and the bullying that Sammy has been doing to me in your private chat.
It wasn't that he was on mute; his head was blocking the microphone. Took a while for the sound to travel around his head to the microphone.
Everyone to know that Monty and Sammy know each other very well, and you will see during this that they definitely work very well together.
So I see Jessica says that I sound a little muffled. Do I still sound muffled? Do I sound muffled to you guys?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, you do sound a little muffled.
Not right now, though. You guys are both on mute.
Yes, we are. All right. Well,
I'm not on mute.
she's
You're on
figuring out
mute.
her little technical difficulties right now. Who wants to go first? Don't all raise your hand at once.
Hold on. Did you just say while my head is tan, your body will never be because of it? Did you really write that in the chat?
Yes, he did put that in there.
Man, shooting shots.
I also said both your ears are in different time zones.
What am I missing here, man? This is why you have no friends. Nobody likes you.
Okay, boys. All right. So who wants to go first and tell their
Let
experiences
Linda go first.
before? Linda, do you want to go first on your
Sure.
experiences that you
Linda.
had?
Sure, I'll go first. I don't know. I mean, I guess before I went to actual prison, I had only done a little bit of time in county jail, nothing really, big. So I have to say, going to prison, walking into Cheetah, which is the women's prison in Wisconsin, you spend your first 4 to 5 months you spend in maximum security. So that's 23 hours a day locked down, 1 hour out. You walk into this big concrete building, and reality sets in that you're done. Like your freedom is now officially gone. I mean, county jail is bad, but that first initial shock of walking into prison is something else. I don't know. It wasn't the most awful experience, but it definitely wasn't something I'd want to do or suggest anybody else does either. I don't know. I learned a lot about myself in that time. I did my entire sentence by myself. I didn't have family. I didn't have friends. I didn't have anybody. So you really get a good chance at looking back and reflecting on your life. I don't know. I mean, I don't know really what you want to know.
I'm sorry.
From there,
I might have missed it. How long did you say that you were incarcerated? Can I say locked up? I mean, are you guys cool with that? I'm not offending anybody if I'm like, hey, how long were you locked up? Like, I just kind
No.
of feel like I'm too like, I don't know. I feel like it's hard for me to be so proper when it comes to like me just really wanting to like connect with people. I'd rather just be like real instead of being like, can you tell me your term of incarceration? Like, I just felt weird, so I apologize.
This bit I just did in prison was 2 years. So I had gone back to county jail after that, unfortunately. But this one was 2 years. So from there, I got lucky. My charges weren't so severe that it kept me at Cheetah. I actually ended up going to Robert Ellsworth, which is in Union Grove, and that's a minimum security. So once I was there, it was a lot better. You get to move around a lot more, and things get a little easier.
Okay. And when you said that you went away, you did it on your own. You didn't see your family. There was no contact. Did they just break contact with you? Or did you just tell them, I will talk to you when I get out?
No, they broke contact with me.
Okay. Wow. I'm sorry to hear
How
that.
did that make you feel like at first? Because I can just assume or like imagine, like, for one, you already feel like over the top lonely when you're locked away, right? Like, and for anybody who can't empathize or sympathize with this, I want you to think about how you felt during COVID times 10. Okay. So I mean, when they broke contact, was it something that you already kind of expected for them to do, or were you like relying on having them there? Because when people, when you lose contact with your family, when you're locked up, you're losing your only source of speaking to somebody outside. You're losing, maybe people putting money on your books, like, stuff like that. So like, how did you kind of feel when that happened?
With me, it started right from the very beginning of my incarceration before I was sentenced while I was still in county. So I pretty much just gotten used to it. I would definitely say now it affected me in ways that I guess I didn't even realize. Now I'm a lot more introverted than I was before I got incarcerated. I basically don't rely on anyone. So I guess it does have a long-term effect on you. So.
Well, Sammy, how was your experience before and during your incarceration?
Well, first of all, Elaine, I think it's safe to say you can ask us anything because like we're very open. Our lives are like open books. I've actually written a book about my life.
I thought you were going to call me out about eating my chamoy when you said, well, first of all, Elaine, I was like,
No, no, not at all. It ain't like that. You know, we're what we call, we're self-described formers, and so part of being a former is being transparent about our lives and answering the community's questions about any aspect of our lives, because like that transparency I think goes a long way to help people feel at ease with us, knowing that we're so open, right? Because when you're in that other life, you got secrets, right? You're secretive, you're quiet, you isolate, you categorize and keep things separate. But in this life, we just try our best. So it is what it is. Don't hesitate to ask me on one thing, anything, except like how big the tape measure has to be to get around his head. He doesn't know. Nobody knows. We've never discovered that. However, I was locked up about 15 and a half years total. I got out of prison when I was 29. I've been out of prison maybe roughly around 22 years now. I actually left home when I was 11, and I basically raised myself on the streets in the city of Chicago. And almost immediately at that point, you know, I got in by my first summer, I was in a gang. I was having sex. I didn't know it then, but I was 11 dating an 11-year-old girl. That was my first girlfriend. She was pregnant before the end of the year. I didn't even know I was in puberty. Like I was so young, I didn't even know my body, what I was really doing. You know, and I had made a baby before I even understood that I was in puberty, you know. And that would have been my first son, but he was born stillborn. So before we turned 12, me and her buried our first child together. And then I went on to have another child with her a few years later. I spent a lot of time as a child in and out of institutions. And I think it's worth mentioning that almost every institution I've ever been in, both as a juvenile and as an adult, has later been condemned as inhumane and has been shut down, both in Illinois and here in Wisconsin, because I was locked up in 2 states as an adult. In fact, one of the last prisons I was in Wisconsin has been the Hole, where I spent a lot of time. Out of that 15 years, I probably spent close to 12 years in segregation because I was so violent as I was violent as an inmate. So they started to isolate me from the other inmates to the point.
Did you feel that you had to be violent as an inmate? Because, you know, what's really funny is that my daughters have really been into like watching like 90 Days In. I don't know if y'all have heard of these like shows or whatever, but they're like on Netflix and Hulu and all this other stuff, right? And they typically send people who are non-violent, you know, people into these situations, and they send them more into like not like non-violent areas, a little bit like more like medium security of, you know, these things. And I noticed that even some of them feel the need to get violent. Even some of these people who are there and know that they're only in there for the cameras, they feel the need to, you know, to kind of rep who they are, so that way they're not messed with. And I mean, truth be told, everybody knows like behind the scenes of stuff, like being really locked up and stuff, like you have to be able to hold your own. Like even if you don't necessarily want to fight, sometimes you have to, and you know that you have to. So it's kind of like a dog eat dog world in there. So did you feel the need sometimes that you had to?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, you're humiliated to the point where it becomes unbearable if you're not violent, right? Especially if you're a young boy.
Yeah.
If you're a boy or even a man at some point in age, I would say if you don't show that you're willing and are capable of being violent, you will be humiliated to the point where you will either kill yourself or be killed by your peers, right? And the only way to overcome that humiliation is to become violent, right? You have to prove. So it's like, I think you're touching on something where only in hindsight will you recognize that you spent a lot of your time proving that you weren't a bitch, excuse my language, right? Like you weren't even proving that you were strong or that you were courageous or that you were really just trying to prove to people that you weren't scared, you weren't meek, you weren't weak, you weren't too feminine. Like you really spent a lot of time building an image, and your image becomes more important than your own life, because you'll sacrifice your life to maintain your image. You'll sacrifice your freedom to maintain that image, right? So, but you can't tell somebody in that life that that's what they're doing, because when you're in that life, you're totally disconnected from that reality, right? And there's so much invested in trying to be.
Sammy, I just have to pause you really quick because someone actually has a question for you. They want to know, were you just rebellious as a kid, or what was the reason that you left home?
In a nutshell, by the time I was 2, my mom's brother was raping me and my sister, who was 5. And that went on for years. And when we finally told my mom, she allowed it to happen. I later found out, and the abuse that my mom was raining down on me, I had felt and suspected for a long time that she was actually trying to kill me multiple times. Like, I've had a lot of near-death experiences through those beatings that she laid down on me. When I was 45 years old, I found out I had an older brother who she tried to kill while she was 5 months pregnant with me. He was 20 months old when she beat him with a metal Tonka truck, fractured his skull, caused paralysis and brain damage on his body. He was taken from the home before I was born. So I didn't know about him until I was 45. So that's for me is confirmation that she was doing that with me in front of my other siblings. She focused on me. So I wasn't just rebellious. And while I was sent to all these institutions, I was actually the only one ever held accountable for my actions in my family. My parents never spent a day in jail, never had to answer for the abuse, the neglect, the starvation, the sexual assaults. I was the only one answering, and so people saw my behavior, but never asked me, like this lady just did, what was going on with you. They always assumed that it was just a bad kid. So today I would say I wasn't rebellious. I was doing exactly what I should have done in the face of having my life trying to be stripped from me before I was even in puberty. You know what I mean?
So cry for help. It was a cry for help. And a lot of people mistaken a cry for help for being rebellious, or being like, there's a lot of reasons why kids do the things that they do. A lot of things come out in different ways for kids. They don't know how to sit down and say, hey, let me tell you how I'm feeling, so it comes out in like a completely different way.
Even I would say that additionally to that, I was begging for help and it was falling on deaf ears. And nobody was reaching out. All my tios and tias, all my family, my abuelos, everyone knew what was going on, and no one stepped in on our behalf. I would go to school beat up, like I had just gotten rolled on the streets or something, hair missing from my head, lips swollen, black and blue, cuts, broken bones. And it was like I was invisible. So it goes beyond just crying for help. Like eventually what happened is I realized no one was coming to help. And then when I ran away from home, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I decided to not be beat like that. I decided to not ever let anyone touch me like that. And I started imitating the people around me who I thought were the toughest. And what I learned from that observation was that if you are violent and more violent than the man standing next to you, you'll be okay. You'll be safe.
So you didn't have, like, you couldn't go to a grandparent. You couldn't go to anyone. You were just on your own. And that left you into the prison system. That's kind of, you make me want to, like, that makes me want to cry just to know that a child
When
can
I
go through that.
When I ran away from home on my 11th birthday, I had never spent the night outside of my house. I never had a friend over. I never rode a bike. I was on a timer from school to home and home to school with my family. So I never had anything to do with the outside world. So things were so bad that when I ran away at 11, I ran into a world that I had no connection to. And I ran as far as I could from my family, and I never went back willingly throughout my life. If I was taken back home before they could really lock the door, I was out the other door, right? So yeah, I walked into a world where there was nothing waiting for me, but I made a home for myself on the streets, and I became a gang member. I became violent. I became a criminal. And I did a lot of those things in the beginning to survive, but later on, I had taken all that hurt and suffering and turned it into hate. So then, to Elaine's original question, I became violent because that was the only form of communication that I felt anyone ever listened to from me.
And with your sister, did you feel protective over her when she was able to get away from that?
My sister protected me.
Okay.
I love my sister to death, man. My sister, we're only a few years apart, man, but my sister, when we were younger, when we were kids, my sister protected me with her own body, her own life. She gave me a piggyback ride when we ran away from home together one time, from one town to the next. So like imagine walking from the far south side of Kenosha to the north side of Racine. She gave me a piggyback ride from Waukegan, Illinois to Libertyville while she was just trying to escape with me from my parents. Like my sister did everything for me as a child. It wasn't until we got older that we fell apart because she started becoming abusive to her kids the way my mom was abusive with me. And I couldn't tolerate that. We couldn't get along because of that. And so we started separating. And even to this day, we don't talk.
Can I ask
But-
you, when the simple little things that people like kind of take for granted, like having friends over and stuff like that, it hit a little bit of a trigger with me, right? So I want to ask you this a little bit, like you not having a connection with the outside world, was that because of the abuse? Because I remember, I was like in a really bad relationship where it was like sadistically abusive, not just like regular abusive, like it was sadistically abusive. And I remember like my kids not allowing them to have sleepovers because I was also protected. That's like a protective thing, right? I didn't want to let them have a sleepover because what if something happened to me during this sleepover? I would have to explain it to someone else's parents, or you know what I mean? And I didn't want that. I didn't want to have an extra kid in that because my kids, sounds like freaking horrible, but my kids had escape plans. Like there were keys at the back door, shoes at the back, like it goes real deep. So that kind of triggered me a little bit because little simple things that people take for granted, like sleepovers and stuff. Is that one of the reasons that there was like the abuse in the home? So it was like you couldn't have the normal shit that kids are supposed to fucking have, like sleepovers.
I was born in Texas. My family are Tejanos, right? My mom is Mescalero Apache, and my dad's side of the family are like 3 or 4 generations deep into Tejanos, right out there. My mom left Texas to escape the questions about what happened to my brother, because my dad's family wanted to know what the hell was going on with my parents abusing my brother. So my mom, I know today that my mother left Texas to avoid supervision and accountability, and brought us to a state where we had no connection to her. Some of her family followed her, but her own mother, it was her brother, my grandma, her mom knew that her son was raping me and my sister and would defend him over us. I found out just a few years ago so I lost connection with my whole family after 11. But a few years ago, I found out that same man ended up getting married, and he had other kids, and he sexually assaulted all his kids. He also sexually assaulted some of my other cousins who I lost contact with. One of them is now in prison for what they did as a result of that. Right. So my mom moved, and a lot of abusers do that. They'll isolate you so that you don't have anywhere to turn for help, or they only surround themselves with people who support that kind of lifestyle and abuse, right? Like who will cover it up. So there was, it was very, in my opinion, it was intentional that we were so isolated.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I kind of read that when you said that. I just kind of think that sometimes the world doesn't realize that those simple things are like red flags. They're red flags to watch out for, and maybe to know like, wow, that kid never can do anything. That there's like, there's definitely red flags that I feel like a lot of times when it comes to the youth that we overlook, and we look at the dumb shit instead.
Every behavior has a meaning. Every
Yeah.
behavior has a meaning. And if you can take your time to be curious about what's happening, you'll find out that it's more than just a kid who's troubled.
Yeah. So go ahead, Missy.
Monty, So how was your life before you were incarcerated or before you were put in prison and arrested?
So I grew up different. I'm from Los Angeles. My parents moved out there so my dad could attend law school. He was a heroin addict. He had committed a murder at UW Marquette in the 70s and was found not guilty by reason of insanity, but he still couldn't practice law in the state of Wisconsin at that point. So he moved my mother to Los Angeles, and I have family out there too, but we grew up similarly in the fact that we were isolated from anyone. We didn't have any direct, my grandparents lived in Wisconsin on both sides. 90% of my tias and tios lived here in Wisconsin. We lived in East LA. My dad was a heroin addict. He was not an abusive human being towards his children. Like, he hugged me, but not too much. He kissed me appropriately. He told me he loved me and wanted good for me. He also started me selling dope at 7 and selling needles to junkies on Skid Row. My life of crime started in single digits. Me and my dad would, at 8, we stole. And I laugh now because he's been gone for a while, and you think about the past. This is how inappropriate my dad's thought process was without realizing it was bad. We went shopping for a mini bike when I was 8, and we found the one I liked, and it was at an outdoor motorcycle dealership in Los Angeles. And that night we got into the station wagon, went to the dealership, cut the chain, threw it in the back, and took it home. You dig what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I was a daddy's boy, right? My dad was my best friend. At no point was my father ever my father. He was always my homie, right? He couldn't function without me. And like, even my mother, who struggled her hardest to keep the family together because she thought that's what was supposed to be, all that did was push her into a life of addiction, right? Now I have 2 parents, 3
Was her
sisters.
addiction also heroin, or was she into something else?
My mother's addictions were her own. I'm not going to talk about it.
Okay.
Thank you, though. My dad's addictions were anything that made him not conscious of the pain he felt on a daily basis, right? Like, if my dad couldn't get heroin, he would get coke. If he couldn't get coke, he would get mescaline. If he couldn't get mescaline, he would get alcohol. If he couldn't get alcohol, he would find a way to avoid the reality of the things he had done in his past or had been through, right? And that's really the step. That's really the birthplace of all addiction. Sammy and I talk a lot about that, right? Where addiction comes from. And it's the attempt to alter reality so that you're not in pain and you're not suffering. And my dad was a true addict. He was also a severe bipolar disorder victim. So he had mental health issues. He's dual diagnosis. So I had started my life of crime at 7. It was my first arrest. And it spiraled out of control all the way until we moved here as a young teen. And my mother finally was able to work with my family here to kidnap me and my sisters. And they literally, what happened is we were kidnapped and brought to Wisconsin. And my mother started a good life. She got a home, she got a good job. She got married to another man who was a decent dude, but I couldn't stand. But at that point, I had been an adult so long that, you can't make me go back to being a child. And so I continued to live out my life. And then my father came to Wisconsin, and I moved in with him. And then I came home from school one day, and he had left for California and left me a note saying that he would send for me, which crushed me. I mean, he was my best friend. So for me, I had always had this, and yeah, my mother punished me physically, but I was a very wild and upset and lost kid, right? Like, and I talk about it a lot because it's important to understand why I was so violent, right? And I was violent from the get. Like, I think we were here for 3 months, and I crushed a kid's skull for throwing a rock at my little sister. I beat him up, and then I
Where do you
stopped.
think that it stemmed from a little bit, Monte? Like,
Well,
where
I
do
know
you
what
think
it
it's
stemmed from. I've spent years now, in therapy. Me and Sammy have spent years working together. I had always had like this emptiness and this self-hatred and this self-loathing and a lack of ability to love myself, right? Like I hated myself as a human being. Even at 9 years old, right? I wasn't important enough to love. I wasn't good enough to love. I couldn't understand why anybody would pretend like they did, but never be there when we needed them, right? You love us, but where were you when my mother was working 3 jobs, my dad was stealing all her money for dope, and I was stealing food to feed my 3 sisters because they cried to themselves, right? Where the fuck were you if you loved me during all those times, right? And for me, I was and I still am, I'm a very sensitive human being, right? And that's not an acceptable thing in the lifestyle that we live, right? You can't be sensitive and be in the fucking streets. You can't be sensitive and be a man, right? You can't do these things. So for me, by the time I was 14, I had a litany of felonies, longer than most adults. I had 37. By the time I was 16, and they put me in adult court, I had 37 assault and batteries and 2 attempted murders, and I was 16, right? So when I hurt, and it took a long time to understand, that's what they say, right? When somebody hurts your feelings, we talked about this. When somebody hurts your feelings, what do? You say, hey man, I didn't appreciate what you said. You hurt my feelings. I don't think we should talk no more. Right? That's the appropriate response to somebody hurting your feelings. For me, I didn't ever have the ability to say those words. That wasn't the language I spoke. My first language is violence, right? So when you hurt my feelings, the best way to explain it is I want to make your outsides feel like my insides, and I can't hurt you enough to make you feel like I feel inside, right? ¿Entiendes? You get what I mean? So
I mean, I do, yeah.
no matter how hard I hit you, no matter how many times I hit you, you can never feel as horrible about me as a human being as I felt about myself at that point, right? So when I was incarcerated, I was sentenced to 30 years at 19 years old with a 1-year-old and a 2-month-old son. A 2-month-old son I had never been without a day since he was born, right? I was with my son every day of his life from the time he was born, right? Until I was taken away. Right? That was my boy. So you give a 19-year-old boy a 30-year sentence, and I was a child mentally, emotionally, psychologically. At 19, I was still 10. You know what I mean? I served 18 years for driving in. I was convicted of driving in 2 armed robberies. I was sentenced to 30 years. All the gunmen got 15 or less. And I thought I was going to die in prison.
So you as the driver got 30 and the actual gunman got 15 or less. Do you feel like that was an unfair? I mean, I feel like that's just not a fair sentence. I mean, it's just not. Right?
If I was just the driver, then I would agree with you. But I mean, it was pretty plain that the people that I was involved with were at a much lower level of criminality than I was, right?
Okay.
Oh, so you think it was fair? The sentence was fair?
I'm not going to say I think a 30-year sentence for a 19-year-old boy was fair. I think
I mean,
giving
I know
more time to my
regardless, I feel like
codependent was fair.
the incarceration times are like so high for certain shit, just money bases from the state.
Right. I was incarcerated with an individual who had spent 4 years raping his children and got 9 years in prison. I stole a handful of money and cigarettes and received 30 years, right?
Right.
So I'm not going to say my 30-year sentence was fair.
I guess I'm not saying that it was fair, but
what I'm going to say is that it was fair that I got more time than the children that I had encouraged to become bad people.
Yeah,
right?
That's what I meant. So
I didn't fall in with the bad crowd. I was the bad crowd.
Right. So during your incarceration, and this goes for all 3 of you, what was the thing that motivated you to come out in society and say, I'm not going back? Like, I am making this work. I am going to try my hardest to do that. And what was your biggest hurdle that you had to come across once coming out?
I think for me personally, it was the fact that I lost everything. When I tell you I lost everything, I lost my 20-year marriage. I lost my 4 children. Um, to sit there and reflect back and realize like all the mistakes that I had made in my life, and mine started when I was young. I was 11 years old. I was out drinking, smoking weed, running around gang banging, doing all kinds of stuff I shouldn't have been doing. So there's a lot that did lead up to it. But when I actually had to sit down and think about my life as a whole and everything that I had lost, um, I can't imagine going back to that life and doing it all over again. It wouldn't work for me personally. I couldn't do it. But that's the one thing that made me change my life. I'm also a recovering addict. I've been clean for a really long time now. But that had a lot to do with my life, and I was like that too, where I felt like I had to numb everything. Emotion was not a word that I was taught. It was not something that we were allowed to show. If something was bothering you, we were told a pity party table of one. Nobody wants to hear it. So I've had to deal with a lot of that, and I can't for myself. I can't go back to that life. So I think that's what it was for me, just knowing that I lost everything.
How about you, Sammy?
I was so when I by the time I was 17, I survived a prison race riot in Illinois, and then that was the first time I spent years in segregation. I spent the next 28 months in segregation for my role. I helped take over the prison. I had assaulted a warden, and they put me in the hole for a long time. The By the time I got forced into a treatment program, I wasn't trying to hear anything that anyone had to say. And I was quite happy with the life I had. Um, I didn't see a problem with it. And that included, being separated from my kids. I just thought it was a part of the cost I had to pay because I was so involved in the streets. And I actually thought the life I was living was serving my kids to, in some way, shape, or form. And I became a gang leader, one of the highest ranking gang leaders in Chicago, and and probably, if not the highest ranking gang member in Wisconsin during my time. And by the time I was put in this treatment program, I thought I'm going to play this game. I'm gonna be able to go here and try to get these people to let me out, because I had already lost all my good time, because I had beat up 4 more guards here in Wisconsin when I got to Wisconsin. I'd been out of the 7 years. I was originally sentenced to 6. Should have did 2. I ended up doing 7 because they gave me new charges for the assaults on the officers. But because I was so volatile, they kept me in the hole. So going to this treatment program was kind of like a break from the hole. But while I was there, they asked me a couple of questions about myself that I wasn't expecting. I didn't have an answer to. There was no getting around them. The first question was, well, the first thing they did was ask me for the first time in my life to tell them about my life. And so what I did was basically like spilled my guts about what my mother had did. Like most of my grievances at that time were about what my mother had done, and that the man I was today was in many respects the person she made me to be. So after I got done telling that story, man, the counselor did a couple of things that really, I think, opened me up. He asked me, well, first he said he acknowledged my pain. He said, I can see that you've suffered. And I could tell you at the age of 27, that was the first time I had ever heard anyone validate that point. Most of my life, it had just been dismissed because of my behavior, like that my pain and suffering didn't matter anymore because of the kind of person I became. So he was the first one in a long time. So, and I think that opened me up to him. That compassion and that empathy really went a long way with me, because I wasn't used to that. Mm-hmm. The second thing he did was have me identify with my mother in a way I didn't know I could. He asked me, have you ever hurt anyone the way your mother hurt you? And, at this point, it was undeniable that I had hurt people the way my mother had hurt me. And in some cases, you could argue I had hurt people worse. And what made it even a little worse for me was I had hurt innocent people who weren't even related to me, who had done me no wrong. At least I was my mom's son, but I know I had committed acts of violence against innocent victims. So when he asked me that, I couldn't even lie. Like, I wanted to lie, but my reaction was just to be honest, which was, yes, I have done those things. Then the second question he asked me, have you ever hurt your kids the way your mother hurt you? Now, there was a part of me that wanted to be able to say no, because I haven't abused my kids. But one of the reasons I haven't abused my kids, I've been in prison their whole life. Up to this point, I've been incarcerated their entire life. I haven't even been a part of their life to be able to abuse them. And who knows, I probably would have abused them just based on how freaking violent I was. I don't know.
Yeah.
But what I did recognize, that I had hurt my kids in a way that my mother had hurt me and her whole family had hurt me. I had abandoned my kids the way my mother had abandoned me. My mother left me out to dry and fed me to the wolves. And
It
I
honestly
recognized,
seems a little bit like your mom was dealing with a lot of her own mental issues and
amen.
mental anguish, for sure. You know, for it to be just relayed onto her children that way, it almost feels like, in a huge sense, that she was definitely dealing with some anguish of her own.
And I had dismissed that up until this question, because up until this question, I didn't care what she had been through, because what she did to me was wrong.
Yeah.
But what I realized in the middle of that question was that if I wanted to be understood why I was so violent based on what had happened to me, for some reason, somehow I got to the point where I realized my mom deserved to be understood why she was so violent. And that was the first time I had empathy for my mother. The first time in my whole life that I ever had empathy for her. Now, that didn't mean we were good and square and everything was fine. What it meant was that I finally understood her in a way, because this man led me to understand myself.
Mm-hmm.
That I was motivated by those wounds. And I recognized that my mother was motivated by her wounds, and her mother before her, and so on and so on. Like, the pattern is there. We were all inheriting this wound, and we all expressed it through violence. All of us. All my tios on my dad's side, including my father, died violent deaths. Like, it's inherent. It's like built into our body.
Generational curses, man. We got to break those generational curses.
So
that's what I'm doing
with
today.
that, Jessica Marie says, you obviously grew up susceptible to crime and abuse. Sammy and Monte, in your mind, does that justify your own reasons for going to prison?
Wait, and I kind of want to just, before they answer, I don't want to just have Sammy and Monte kind of think about this question. I also think that Linda should think about this, because even through a mind of addiction, or like going through what you were going through, Linda, also, I feel like it rings kind of true to you too, because there was something else that was underlining that. So I kind of feel like all three of them have had a different story that led to the same path.
The quick answer to that question, Jessica, is there's nothing that justifies my behavior. But if you want to understand what to do about the behavior, you have to spend time understanding what motivated the behavior. What me and Monte have spent an enormous amount of time doing is reflecting on our behavior so that we can understand it, not only so that we can curb our own behavior, but so that we can help others do the same. So what we're hoping to do is never to come across like we're saying, and this is why I should not be accountable. I am accountable, and I'm willing to face accountability. That's why I'm on here being transparent about my life. But what we also need is understanding, like not understanding like, oh, pobrecito, you're a victim, it's okay. No, that's not what we're looking for. What we want to know is what led to that, and how was it that I got to that point, right? And so by sharing this story, we hope that we help other people understand. For example, your listeners might understand why it's important to have more than just judgment about bad behavior. Understanding that bad behavior will allow you to figure out what you need to do to get involved when you're concerned about it, right? So like if somebody would have asked me, Mijo, why haven't you been to school in over a year versus this kid is truant, let's lock him up? Maybe things would have went differently, because people would have tried to understand what was behind my behavior rather than just holding me accountable. I needed to be held accountable, but at the same time, I needed help. That's called restorative justice. You can still hold people accountable, but you also give them the resources and the help that they need.
And you guys have made a program, correct? You together, or is it just you, Sammy? Or
No,
is it...
Sammy founded the program. I've been a part of it since the third meeting, right? And I've been chairing for, well, that's been 8 years. 8 years. Jesus, Lord,
And
bro,
the program is a program to help people that have been in the system come out, correct? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sammy, you want to field that or me?
Yeah. It's a little bit of all of that. It's called Formers Anonymous. We're on Facebook. If you just look that up, we're local, but we have international membership at this point. It's based on the 12 steps, but I've modified it, to be a little more universal for people like the guys we're describing right now. Like even Linda would be a good fit with her background and her lifestyle and what she's facing now that she's out of prison, right? Like, because getting out of prison doesn't mean you're aware that you're ready to be free, that you know what to do with your freedom or how to handle that. And the transition from being a life in prison and the streets to this world is kind of awkward. It's not an actual natural transition, right? It's like, you've been locked down for so long, and then they throw you into the world and like go. And oftentimes there's not a lot of support where people understand what you've been through and what it's like from the way we can, right? And so a lot of times what we're doing is just supporting each other through the trauma that one was inflicted upon us, that the system inflicted upon us, and that we inflicted upon ourselves. Like, we still have to recover from that. Believe it or not, I've been out of prison 22 years. I'm still antisocial as F. Like, I am fine in the pandemic because I don't need to talk to anyone. I can do time. I can sit in a cell. I can sit in the dark, and it doesn't bother me. There's no fear involved.
I wish that was true, because he would stop blowing up my freaking messenger.
I actually want to ask Linda about that, because Linda, you said that you became very, very antisocial, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel like having programs, or even like the Bad Moms group, like, being able to be in there and hearing some of these people's stories or advice or whatever, do you feel like sometimes it prohibits you from like even wanting to be social on social media?
It absolutely does. I find myself a lot of times, even when I'm at home, I'm okay being in my room by myself. I have no problem with it. In fact, there's more times than not that I enjoy my own company more than I enjoy other people's. I think a lot of it is when you're incarcerated, you don't realize that the world outside of those four walls that you're at, it's still going on. For me personally, when I was incarcerated, it felt like the world had stopped. The only thing I had was those four walls. So when I came home and nothing was the same, people had changed, people had moved on, nothing stayed the same. So for me, it was such a shock that it was easier just to shut myself down and stay in that incarcerated frame of mind where I'm okay by myself.
And that's by design, you guys. So just so you know, what we're speaking about right now isn't just us as three individuals. This is done by design. The industrial prison complex is made for profit, right? And it's made to continue to turn us over and churn us, right? There's a reason why we're left to the wolves, right? There's a reason why we're not given the tools automatically to succeed when we're released. There's a reason why we're left in isolation to a point where we prefer isolation. And this is a problem in my home. So my spouse and my children mean the world to me. I am just as okay locked in my office, right? And I got a small little office, just about double the size of a normal cell. I can lock that door. I can turn the music on or do whatever I'm doing and be here for an entire day without seeing my children or my spouse. And I'm okay with that.
So
right?
it's turned you into introverts.
Kind of.
No.
It just makes us comfortable. It makes us comfortable in our own presence, right? Sometimes I need solitude. I need isolation, right? I need times like after the situation with my son, I don't think people understood. Although I appreciated the outpouring of support, I needed to be alone to grieve, right? I'm incapable of grieving amongst others, right? This is a problem. It's an emotional disability. I don't want to grieve around others. It's not just that I don't want to. I want to be by myself.
And
It's not that I don't love you. It's not that I don't respect you. It's not that I don't covet your company. It's that at this moment in my life, I'm incapable of grieving with you next to me.
And that's not necessarily, I don't see anything necessarily wrong with that. Grieving by yourself, because I am the same way when, you know, I had to grieve, I had a miscarriage. I didn't want anyone near me. I didn't want to talk about it. I just wanted
I don't want to hear, how are you? I
Yeah.
don't want to hear, are you okay?
Yes.
I don't want to hear, what
Yes.
happened?
Yes.
What
And
does
I have
fucking matter?
And I have a friend that's like that too. Anytime something's wrong with, I always know something's wrong because she pulls away. That's just who she is. That's just who you are. Is grieving by yourself okay? Yes, it's perfectly. It's your way of processing it.
But I think
So
the problem that we're experiencing is what we haven't really been allowed to experience, because I think, like, the way society is conditioned to think about criminals like us, is that we don't deserve to even be acknowledged as someone who has suffered, right? PTSD from prison is a real thing, right? But I was told in treatment that I really couldn't talk about my suffering because it was a sign that I was starting to feel sorry for myself and that I was going to be at risk for committing another crime if I stopped to kind of share my load with anyone. That I needed to bury that part of my recovery because it was a bad sign. It wasn't until 2012, when I was getting a divorce and I found myself in an empty house, that I realized that all of that time I spent in the hole was still bothering me because I didn't know how to adjust to being alone in my home, right? I found myself doing what I call timing out. My kids would leave on a Friday afternoon, and I wouldn't eat until the Wednesday afternoon that they were coming home, and I'd be sitting on my couch for several days at a time. No one would know, right? And I finally end up realizing something's going on. I need to go to counseling. I went to counseling, and my therapist helped me figure out that I am kind of reliving what it's like to be in segregation again, right? And he's the first person who used that term with me with PTSD, and saying, you've got to process this pain. You've got to process this suffering. So for us, it's not necessarily grieving alone. It's more of the side effect. I think it goes to the term institutionalization, right? It's the effect of being institutionalized. This is one of the leftover effects of what the conditions of prison do for you. Here in Wisconsin, the hole where I did most of my time has been condemned as inhumane. In that prison segregation is called the basement. I was left strapped to a steel cot 2 inches off the floor in a paper gown for months at a time, with my lights never being turned off, with all of my food being condensed and dehydrated and hand fed by the security director, and forced to piss and shit on myself for like 5 or 6 months at a time. Like, you don't just come out of that and come out here and get to walk around normal. I'm still not normal. I'm still dealing with those effects. And granted, there's a part of me that deserved whatever I got for the shit I did. But we cannot apply the same values of the criminals to ourselves and then consider us better than them if that's how we're going to treat people at the humanity level.
And that's why they changed. And you know what? It's funny because we just talked about this on Sunday on my show, is the responsibility of the incarcerators to the incarcerated, right? In the United States, we changed from the penal system, which is why we don't call them penitentiaries anymore. They're labeled correctional systems, right? Correctional institutions. There is a reason for that. Late 60s and 70s, during the movement, the United States as an institution said, we're going to go away from the penalty part. Let's start addressing the correctional part. So the mission statement of the prison system is now to correct, men and women's bad behavior and to help them become better people. That's supposed to be the mission statement, but they're not doing anything to help correct the behavior, they're still living under the same penal system, right? And Sammy's right. How do you, example, one of my very close friends came home after 30 plus years in prison. He was incarcerated at 14, right? At 14, came home in his late 40s, and they told him, here's your parole, get a job, get an apartment. There you go. This kid at 14 years old, he got incarcerated. He's never been home. He was expected to know how to live like an adult when he had never lived free as an adult. There are things that we need to prepare people for. I love you too, sis. That's my baby sister, Prima. There are things we need to prepare men and women who are coming home for that they're not getting prepped for, right? When I came home, I was home for a few weeks before I found Formers. 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I didn't know how to use a cell phone, right? And we laugh about it now, but the amount of shame that I felt when I couldn't call to order myself a pizza and I had to hand my sister the phone and say, how do I make it call? Right? How do I make it call? I was devastated. I was ashamed. I was embarrassed. These are things that I should have known as a man. I didn't know how to start my mother's car. I didn't have a push button car. When I left, you had 2 keys, one for the door, one for the ignition, right? When I went away, you had 2 keys, right? Now they had a button that you pushed, right? I didn't understand any of the things. Nobody prepared me. I had never seen the internet before. I had never seen the internet. It didn't exist when I was incarcerated, right? The World Wide Web wasn't in existence when I was incarcerated. When I came home, it was everything, right?
Yeah.
The only thing I knew about the web when I came home was I could look up things and watch porn, because that's what you see on TV, right? Every time you see someone on TV watching their thing, are you looking at porn? So these are the things that I knew. I didn't know anything else. Nobody had taught me anything. My first meeting, I didn't understand. And it's funny. Yeah, laugh, Sammy. Laugh again, bro. Laugh again. I didn't understand any of these things. I came home with no knowledge of life and was expected to succeed. And I wouldn't have succeeded if I hadn't had a strong support system, right? If I hadn't found Formers in its early stages where I was surrounded by men and women who had gone through the same situations. If I hadn't had a strong family circle who was willing to, guide me. There are men who come home with nothing, right? We talk about losing everything. I spent 18 years in prison. I didn't even have clothes when I came home.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have clothes. I didn't have shoes.
I kind of have like a question for all of y'all. So being locked away, whether it was a couple of years here or a long bit and you're going for a long time, right? Like, do you have any contact with anyone who is currently still locked away? And do you make sure that you answer those phone calls or that you send those letters so that way? Because at some point, right?
There's no time for writing letters, hon.
Well, now they have like that stuff where like you can email too, like everything's kind of like different now. But just saying, like, keeping that contact, because for a while, like, just to give you just a quick little thing, I'd like to hear like how you guys feel about that, because I'm pretty sure you went through times where people would just all of a sudden stop writing, or because life gets busy out here and our lives continue to go on, and y'all are still stuck in this place. So how important is it for you, like, if you do have anyone, or do you have anyone that you're still in touch with, and how important is it for you to stay in contact because of knowing how that feels?
I answer every call.
I still stay in contact with people, and I have to say people's favorite line is, I was going to write you, but no, I still stay in contact with a couple people.
I actually, believe it or not, I actually have Wisconsin Department of Correction staff level clearance. So when it's not COVID, I basically have free access to the prisons all over the state of Wisconsin. And I spend a big part of my working week in and out of prisons, spreading this message to other men in this space, in this state. And of course, I do write other inmates. A lot of them are through that email system. I'm writing a guy in Michigan right now. I do that. However, I think it's important to say, as a former, to the people who are supporting someone who's locked up, formers should not act like they're entitled to support, especially when we have committed the offenses that we've done, and oftentimes when we've been begged by the people who still support us to change our lives, and we never did, right? Like, we didn't respond to their support when we were out. We should not be acting like we're entitled to it. We should not be accusing our loved ones or supporters of like not doing their part or due diligence when they can't send us money or can't afford to answer our calls. Like, and be honest, let's just be straightforward. Most of the people playing a supporting role out here on the streets are women supporting men who are locked up, who lived a lifestyle that didn't put their families first, no matter how they describe it. Right? They were out there running the streets. I can tell you, yeah, I'm doing this for my family, but the reality is that's bullshit. I'm going to call bullshit on that. There are other ways to do that, other ways to support and be there for your family. We're shining examples of that. We figure that shit out. So I just want to make sure that if families, people shouldn't be treating you like you're obligated to do any of that shit. They should be humbled. They should be grateful. They should be patient. They should be understanding. They should not be demanding. And quite honestly, if you got yourself in that mess, figure your financial shit out on your own. Don't burden the people who are probably out here taking care of your family, taking care of your kids, waking up every day, going to work while balancing the babysitter. And like, be empathic to the people who are loving and supporting you. Because I've had it both ways. I've had it where people have loved me and supported me for years, and I've also been alone for years. But I recognize in hindsight that really the people that are loving me and supporting me are also victims of my crime and lifestyle. And I have to come to terms with that. And I need to be loving and respectful to those people and very understanding if and when they can't do things that I would like them to do for me.
Absolutely, bro.
That was a great response.
And
that was a great response.
On that response, it was so great. I want to have to call it to an end tonight. I think it's another conversation I would love to have longer with you guys, all three of you. Monty and Sammy, you guys know both that we love having you on. You guys are always great fun and get to the bottom of the
You notice how Sammy hogged up as much time as he could? Like while he was chastising me in chat, it was actually him just pointing things out.
Well, I'm still waiting for that phone call, Monty, to for the.
Actually, why don't we do coffee this week?
Okay. Well,
hey, if you guys can all stay on when the live ends, but from Life Uncensored and Let's Talk, we would like to thank everyone that came on today. Thank you guys, even with some of the technical difficulties and all of that. And thank you guys for always tuning in and watching every week and just being diligent with us. And we'll definitely bring you guys part 2, 3, 4, and anything else that you guys want to see. You just hit either Melissa or myself up. And don't forget to go like both of our pages, please. We both spend a lot of time making sure that we grow those. So
yes. And the at Lovely Elaine with 2 E's, not a Y, and Mommy Missy both with a Y. If you're trying to find us on Facebook, we also are on YouTube, Twitter, Snapchat, and I'm missing Instagram. So
no,
if
I
you
don't want you on my Snapchat or my Twitter. I'm good. Just find my Instagram.
Wow.
Just keep it real. Just find my Instagram. I'm cool with that.
And Monty would like to say a few things before we leave.
So real quick, Sunday night, 8:00. You'll find us every week either at my personal page or Our Community, Our Responsibility. We're actually discussing this week the effects of incarceration on family, what it put our families through, what they dealt with while we were gone. We had some honest questions, honest answer talks for the last 2 weeks. This week, we're going to be talking about our families, what it did to them, how it affected them. So it's 8:00, and it'll be on either my page, which is just follow my name, or it'll be on Our Community, Our Responsibility, Racine. So, and then I want to talk to the two of you at some point about getting you guys on and doing some interviews about what you do in our community and how it helps our community.
Great. I would love that. I really want to do some, on location lives. I've sent a few messages. It's kind of hard with the pandemic. And then everyone, I also, and this is for me, I want to thank everyone that has kept my father in their prayers. If you don't know, he is battling kidney cancer. We found out Friday. He had emergency surgery this weekend. He is recovering now, and we are just going with the next step process. Please just keep him in his prayers of a fast and easy recovery, because if anyone does know that my father does so much for so many, and he will stop everything in the middle of the night if you call him, and he really needs our support.
We're praying for him.
Thank you. Everyone, have a great week, and we will see you next week. We were going to be talking about mental health and the issues that has to do with March. Have a great night. Bye.